Today we're going to be discussing just a quick little mini lesson on the legislative and the executive branch combined, but we are going to be skipping over the judicial branch since we have another mini lesson on that. Um, the institutional powers is the Senate ratifies the treaties with two-thirds vote, and Senate approves appointments with majority vote. House votes for impeachment, Senate tries the impeachment case. If no electoral college majority, the House elects the president, the Senate, the vice president. Proposal of constitutional amendments with two-thirds vote in each house. They can seat, unseat, and punish members of both houses. They don't necessarily have equal power, we would say. The Senate probably is just slightly more important, for sure. The Congress is a bicameral legislature. It protects the interests of the large and small states through the Virginia Compromise, and it protects the interests of federal state governments as well, federal and state governments. The evolution of Congress struggles within Congress are the distribution of power within Congress. The period of the founding is originally directed by the executive branch and soon developed into its own leadership. Originally, the House was the preeminent institution, not the Senate or the executive branch. To determine fair representation, getting elected to Congress, we have malapportionment, gerrymandering. Determining representation, it's the total size of the House, allocating seats among the states, determining size of congressional districts within states, and determining shape of those districts. Something that we talk about in our more extensive live lessons is a lot about gerrymandering and reapportionment with the census. Winning the primaries, you have to have increased advantage for incumbents. This is something, something like franking, that we have lots and lots of advantages for the incumbents. And re-election definitely influences the term. Here's a picture of gerrymandering at its worst with the Florida District 5, goes all the way up to Jacksonville, across Gainesville, and down to Orlando. So we have many demographical changes, representation in Congress, especially with gender and race. So we have a lot more women these days, and lots of women and men of different types of backgrounds. We used to have a lot of older white males that come from law and business backgrounds, and now that is definitely changing. Incumbency, growing percentage of re-elected members, biggest factor in congressional elections as well. And Congress is being seen as more of a career now versus servitude. And we have lots of debate on term limitations. So here's the party structure of the House. We have 435 members, 2-year term limits, no limit on terms. You have to be at least 25 years old, citizen for 7 years, and resident of your state, speaker. There is a Speaker of the House, a floor leader, the Majority Leader, and the Minority Leader. And we have a Steering and Policy Committee, committee assignments. Recent changes in the House, we have the increased power of all representatives, increased number of all subcommittees, including power of chairpersons, and an increase in the amount of staff. There's been a decentralization of the House as well. We've had a rise in party caucus, rules of committee, what legislation is getting presented, rise of chairpersons of standing committees, setting committee agendas, determining which bills to report out, influence on content of bills, and reward for seniority. The Senate has 100 members with a 6-year limit. It's staggered, so a third of the senators is elected every 2 years. At least 30 citizen for 9 years and resident of the state of the requirements. Vice President is President of Senate, only votes in a tie. There's a ceremonial position with the VP. And they're the President pro tempore in the line for presidency after the Speaker. Real power is in the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader, known as whips. Majority Leader recognized first for all debates, and true leader of Majority Party in Senate. Policy Committee sets the Senate agenda. Organization of Congress, staffs and specialized offices. Vast recent increase in staff size. We have tasks of staff members, servicing requests from constituents, local offices as well as Washington offices, legal paperwork for Congress members, advocacy, role for staff, negotiators. We have staff agencies, the Congressional Research Service, General Accounting Office, Office of Technology Assessment, and Congressional Budget Office. The real work of Congress is done in the committee and subcommittees. We represent most of the power of Congress. Decisions on committees determine legislation. Roughly 24 committees and over 100 subcommittees. We have standing committees, which are permanent, select committees, which are appointed for a limited purpose, joint committees, both representative and senators serve. Number of seats vary by committee. Seniority does play a role in the selection process, and chairs are of the majority party. We have secret ballots, expertise. Generally, seniority system is honored. Types of committees, we have House and Senate. House, Rules Committee is the most powerful. Ways and Means deal with tax bills. Appropriations deals with spending bills. Then we have the budget and the armed services. For Senate, we have Finance deals with tax bills. Appropriations deals with spending bills. Budget and foreign relations to reflect the Senate role in foreign affairs. Here's a great slide on how a bill becomes a law for your assignment in Module 5. You do need to fill this out, and this is also available within the class. Ethics in Congress. We have incumbency advantage in elections. So we have a re-election rate in the House is over 90% and in the Senate over 80%. We have a franking privilege, which is about stamping and sending stuff out. Staff, patronage, name recognition, and of course money as well. Attempts at reform. We have financial disclosure statements. Honorarias. Can no longer keep surplus campaign funds for personal use after retirement. Restriction on gifts, and there are also free travel restrictions. So now going on to the executive branch and the evolution of the presidency, we have the president's term of office, the traditional 2-term limit until Roosevelt. That was the 22nd Amendment in 1951. Jefferson and Jackson increased role and power of president with acts and vetoes. Then we have the reemergence of Congress. After Jackson left office, Congress re-exerted itself. Lincoln, of course, is the exception to that. So we have a continuing pattern until FDR and the New Deal, and Teddy and Wilson are the exceptions to that. Current changing view of president as the initiator of policy. He is the commander-in-chief, head of armed forces, commission officers of the armed forces. He's the chief jurist, grants reprieves and pardons for federal offenses, and appoints federal judges. He's the chief legislator, convenes Congress in special sessions, proposes legislation, and vetoes legislation. Chief diplomat, which means he appoints ambassadors, sets overall foreign policy, negotiates treaties and executive agreements, grants diplomatic recognition to foreign governments. The chief executive means he enforces the laws, loosely interpreted, treaties and court decisions. He appoints officials to the office, issues executive orders, which have the force of laws. And chief of state, ceremonial head of nation. Most nations separate chief of state and chief executive. The non-constitutional roles, he's the head of political party and the chief economist. Greatest source of presidential power is in public opinion. From World War II to today, presidential power has grown due to public expectations, especially due to the Cold War and terrorism. Qualifications, he has to be a natural-born citizen, 35 years of age, resident of the U.S. for at least 14 years. Growth of staff and responsibility, the first secretary in 1857, White House staff 500. Staff can isolate the president, however. Appointments to cabinet, courts, agencies, etc. Office of Management and Budget, he assembles and analyzes figures, assembles and analyzes figures for the national budget, studies organization and operations of the executive branch, and reviews federal programs. The NSC, National Security Council, coordinates foreign military policy, and it's definitely been growing in importance. We have the Council of Economic Advisors. That's a 3-person advisory group to the president. Office of Personal Management, Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. We have the under the power for the president to persuade. We have three audiences: Washington D.C., which is fellow politicians and leaders; party activists, which are activists in and outside of Washington; and the public. Fewer and fewer impromptu remarks these days, and more dependent on prepared addresses, except for maybe tweeting these days. Veto. The president has the right to veto. There's the pocket veto, where he just literally sets it in the pocket, and it runs out of time. Then we have the executive privilege. Constitution is silent on matter. President claims the right. Separation of powers. One branch can't look into the affairs of the other. Statecraft and prudent administration. First real challenge came in 1973 with Watergate, with the separation of powers there and looking into each other's, administrations and branches. Impoundment of funds. Refusal to spend money appropriated by Congress. Congress responded with Budget Reform Act of 1974, and the money must be spent.